respond, just nodded slightly and began to wander the aisles. I tried to focus on my magazine, but I found myself watching him out of the corner of my eye. He moved methodically, examining items on the shelves with an odd intensity, but he never picked anything up, never seemed interested in actually buying anything. After about 20 minutes of this, he approached the counter. I straightened up, expecting him to finally make a purchase. Instead, he just stood there, staring at me with those unsettling eyes. "Can I help you find anything?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. He cocked his head slightly as if considering the question. When he spoke, his voice was low and smooth, with an accent I couldn't quite place. "No, thank you. I'm just..." in my head, approached me. He was smiling again, that same cold, empty expression. "Hello, Alex," he said softly. "We've been waiting for this moment for a long time." I backed away, my voice shaking. "What do you want? Who are you?" He cocked his head again, that bird-like motion that was somehow deeply unsettling. "We are observers. Collectors, you might say. And you, Alex, have caught our attention." The other two were closing in now, forming a loose circle around me. I glanced frantically towards the door, but it seemed miles away. "I don't understand," I said, trying to keep them talking while I looked for an escape route. The watcher's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "No, I don't suppose you do, but you will. We've been watching this place, this intersection of human lives. So many stories, so many possibilities. But you, Alex, you're special. You see things others don't. You notice, just like us." A chill ran down my spine. He was right. I'd always been observant, always noticed the little details others missed. It was why I was good at this job, why I noticed him in the first place. But how could he know that? "What are you?" I whispered, fear making my voice crack. He reached out then, his hand moving inhumanly fast. His fingers were ice cold as they gripped my arm. "We are the watchers in the dark, the eyes in the shadows. We've existed alongside humanity for millennia, observing, learning, and occasionally, collecting." I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. The other two were even closer now, their eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. "You don't belong here, Alex," the watcher continued. "You're like us. You just don't know it yet. But we can show you. We can open your eyes to the truth." In that moment, I saw flashes of something, impossible visions of other worlds, other realities, countless eyes watching from the darkness between stars. I felt my sanity starting to slip, my grip on reality faltering. "No," I managed to gasp, seeming to fade into the crowd impossibly fast. I never went back to the quick stop. I dropped out of college, moved to a new city, tried to start over, but I can never shake the feeling that I'm being watched. In the darkness of night, I still see those gleaming eyes, and I know that someday they'll come for me again. Because now I understand a terrible truth. There are things in this world that exist in the shadows, things that watch and wait, and once they've noticed you, I told myself it was all nonsense, the ravings of a madman. But a part of me knew better. It took me hours to find the basement key. When I finally did, hidden inside a hollow book in the library, I almost wished I hadn't. Everything in me screamed to leave, to forget about the journal and the key and just walk away. But I couldn't. I had to know. The basement door was hidden behind a heavy bookcase that swung out on silent hinges. As I descended the narrow stairs, the temperature dropped noticeably. My flashlight beam danced over stone walls slick with moisture, illuminating strange symbols carved into the rock. The main chamber was larger than I expected, the ceiling lost in shadows above. Rusted metal tables lined the walls, their surfaces stained dark. Shelves groaned under the weight of jars filled with things I didn't want to examine too closely. but it was the object in the center of the room that drew my attention. It was a large metal cylinder, like an oversized coffin stood on end. Tubes and wires sprouted from its surface, connecting to various machines whose purposes I couldn't begin to guess. What kind of monster had he created, and how long had it been down there, sleeping in that metal coffin? I knew I should call the police. But what would I tell them? That my long-dead great-grandfather had created some kind of cybernetic abomination in his basement? They'd think I was insane. As night fell, I paced the overgrown gardens, trying to decide what to do. That's when I noticed the lights in the basement windows. Faint, flickering, but unmistakably there. It was awake, and it was moving. I spent that night in my car, parked far down the street, watching the house. I saw shadows moving behind the windows, heard distant crashes and inhuman noises. By morning, everything was quiet again. When I finally worked up the courage to go back inside, I found chaos, looked handmade, and her feet were bare despite the rocky ground. When she saw me, her face lit up with a warm smile. "Well, hello there," she called out, her voice carrying easily across the clearing. "Don't get many visitors up this way. You must be tired from your journey. Why don't you come in for some tea?" I hesitated. Every instinct honed by years of city living was screaming at me to politely decline and keep moving. But I was tired, and the thought of a real chair and a hot drink was tempting. "I wouldn't want to impose," I said, taking a few steps closer. She waved away my concerns. "Nonsense. We'd love the company. It's just me and my husband, and we don't get to socialize much out here. Please," I insist. Maybe it was the fatigue, or maybe it was the genuine warmth in her voice, but I found myself nodding. "All right. Thank you. That's very kind." As I followed her into the cabin, I noticed movement in one of the windows, a face peering out, there and gone so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. The interior of the cabin was cozy and cluttered, filled with handmade furniture and shelves crammed with books and odd trinkets. The woman, who introduced herself as Martha, bustled about, putting a kettle on the old wood stove and chatting amiably about the weather and the wildlife in the area. I was just starting to relax when her husband appeared. He was tall and rail-thin, with a scraggly beard and eyes that seemed too large for his gaunt face. He didn't speak, just stood in the doorway to what I assumed was the bedroom, staring at me with an unsettling intensity. "This is George," Martha said, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "He doesn't talk much, but he's happy to have you here. Aren't you, dear?" George nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving me. As Martha poured the tea, I found myself growing increasingly uneasy. There was something off about this whole situation, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. The tea had an odd, bitter aftertaste that I didn't like, but I drank it anyway, not wanting to be rude. "So," Martha said, settling into a chair across from me, "what brings you all the way out here, all alone?" I explained about my annual hiking trip, about needing to get away from the noise and stress of the city. As I talked, I noticed my words were starting to slur slightly. My limbs felt heavy, and the room seemed to be tilting at odd angles. "Are you all right, dear?" Martha's voice sounded distant, echoing strangely. "You look a bit pale. Perhaps you should lie down for a while." I tried to stand, to say I needed to get going, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The last thing I remember is Martha and George looming over me, their faces blurring and distorting as darkness closed in. I woke up in stages, awareness coming back in fragments. The first thing I noticed was the cold, a deep, bone-chilling cold that seemed to radiate from the very ground beneath me. Then came the smell, damp earth and something else, something metallic and unpleasant. When I finally managed to open my eyes, I myself in near total darkness. I was lying on a dirt floor, surrounded by rough stone walls. A root cellar, I realized, or some kind of underground room. Panic set in as memories of what had happened came rushing back. I tried to move, only to discover that my hands and feet were bound with coarse rope. My head pounded, and my mouth was dry. After effects of whatever they drugged me with. "Hello?" I called out, my voice hoarse and weak. "Is anyone there?" Silence was my only answer. I don't know how long I lay there in the dark, drifting in and out of consciousness. Time lost all meaning. I was aware of voices sometimes, muffled conversations from somewhere above me, but I couldn't make out the words. At some point, the door at the top of the stairs creaked open, spilling harsh light into my prison. I squinted against the sudden brightness, making out two silhouettes descending towards me. "Oh, good, you're awake." Martha's cheerful voice was at odds with the situation. We were starting to worry. As my eyes adjusted, I saw that she was carrying a tray of food. The smell made my stomach lurch, partly from hunger, partly from revulsion. "Why are you doing this?" I managed to croak out. "Please, just let me go. I won't tell anyone, I swear." Martha tutted softly, setting the tray down beside me. Now, don't be like that. We're not going to hurt you. We just want you to stay with us for a while. It gets so lonely out here, you see." George stood behind her, silent as ever, those two large eyes boring into me. "You can't keep me here," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "People will come looking for me." Martha's smile faltered for a moment, a flicker of something cold and alien passing across her face. "Oh, I don't think so, dear. No one knows you're here, and we're very good at keeping secrets." She reached out, stroking my cheek with a hand that felt too cold, too dry to be human. I flinched away, my skin crawling at her touch. "Now," she said, her voice taking on a sing-song quality, "you need to eat to keep up your strength. We have so many things planned for you." With that, they left, the door closing behind them with a final-sounding thud. I lay there in the darkness, my mind racing. What did they want with me? How long had they been out here, luring in unsuspecting hikers? As the hours, days, wore on, I drifted in and out of lucidity. Sometimes Martha would come down with food or water, always with that same unsettling cheerfulness. Sometimes I'd hear strange noises from above, chanting in a language I didn't recognize, or screams that didn't sound entirely human. I tried to escape, of course. Whenever I was left alone, I worked at my bonds, rubbed them against the rough stone walls until my wrists were raw and bleeding. But the ropes never seemed to fray, never loosened, no matter how much I struggled. It was during one of these attempts that I made a horrifying discovery. As I was feeling along the walls, searching for any sharp edge that might help me cut through the ropes, my hand brushed against something that wasn't stone. It was smooth and round, and when I ran my fingers over it, I realized with a jolt of terror what it was: a human skull. My scream echoed off the walls, and I scrambled back as best I could with my limbs still bound. How many others had been down here before me? How long had Martha and George been doing this? The door opened then, and Martha descended the stairs, candle in hand. But this time, her cheerful mask had slipped entirely. Her face was twisted into something inhuman, her mouth too wide, filled with teeth that were sharp and numerous. "Oh dear," she said, her voice a guttural growl. "You weren't supposed to find that just yet. We like our guests to be properly prepared before the final revelation." As she approached, I saw that George was behind her, his form shifting and changing in the flickering candlelight, limbs elongated, joints bending at impossible angles. His eyes glowed with an eldritch light. "You see," Martha continued, reaching for me with hands that were rapidly transforming into claws, "we're not like you. We've been here for a very, very long time, and we get so hungry." I screamed then, a sound of pure terror and despair. But out here in the vast wilderness, there was no one to hear me, no one to come to my rescue. As they closed in, their forms twisting into something out of a nightmare, I realized the terrible truth. I had walked willingly into their trap, lured by the promise of kindness and warmth, and now I would become just another secret kept by the mountains, another set of bones in the cellar of that isolated cabin. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was Martha's face, still wearing that cheerful smile even as it split open to reveal rows upon rows of razor-sharp teeth. The moment I heard that first unexplained noise, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary night at the hotel, but I never could have imagined the horrors that awaited me, or the dark history I was about to uncover. Sometimes, the most terrifying monsters are the ones hiding behind a facade of normalcy, waiting for unsuspecting guests to check in. It was supposed to be a routine business trip. I'd flown into the city that afternoon for a conference, planning to stay just 2 nights at the Majestic Hotel downtown. The place was nothing special at first glance, an older building that had seen better days, but clean enough and conveniently located. The desk clerk barely looked up as he handed me my key, his voice a bored monotone as he recited the usual spiel about checkout times and complimentary breakfast. I nodded absently, already thinking about the presentation I had to give the next day. My room was on the 7th floor, tucked away at the end of a long corridor. As I made my way down the dimly lit hallway, pulling my suitcase behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavy, oppressive somehow, and I could have sworn I heard whispers coming from behind the closed doors I passed. I shook it off, blaming my overactive imagination and jet lag. But when I reached my room, that uneasy feeling intensified. The door seemed to resist as I pushed it open, as if something on the other side was trying to keep me out. The room itself was unremarkable. Standard hotel fare with bland artwork on the walls and a view of the building next door. I set about unpacking, trying to ignore the faint, musty smell that permeated the air. It wasn't until I was getting ready for bed that things started to get weird. I was in the bathroom, brushing my teeth, when I heard it, a soft thump from the main room, like something heavy being set down. I froze, toothbrush halfway to my mouth. I was sure I'd locked the door behind me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. No response. I cautiously peeked around the bathroom door. The room was empty, everything exactly as I'd left it. But there, on the bedside table, was a small black book that I was certain hadn't been there before. My heart racing, I approached the table. The book was old, its leather cover cracked and worn. There was no title, no author's name, just a strange symbol embossed on the front, a twisted tree with what looked like faces peering out from its branches. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The pages were filled with handwritten text in a language I didn't recognize, interspersed with disturbing drawings of grotesque creatures and bizarre rituals. But what caught my eye was a folded piece of paper tucked between the pages. I pulled it out with trembling hands. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline made my blood run cold. Tragedy at Majestic Hotel. 13 guests missing, presumed dead. The article, dated 1963, described a series of mysterious disappearances at the hotel. Guests had vanished from their rooms without a trace, leaving behind their belongings and locked doors. The police investigation had turned up nothing, and the case remained unsolved. As I read, I became aware of a change in the room around me. The temperature seemed to drop, my breath forming small clouds in the suddenly frigid air, and the whispers I'd dismissed earlier in the hallway were back, louder now, seeming to come from the very walls. I dropped the book and backed away, my heart pounding. This had to be some kind of sick joke, right? A prank played on gullible guests. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something was very, very wrong in this hotel. I grabbed my phone, intending to call the front desk, but there was no signal. The landline in the room was dead, just a faint buzzing when I held it to my ear. That's when the noises started. It began as a soft scratching sound like nails on wood, coming from inside the closet, then a dull thud from above, as if something heavy had fallen, or been dropped. And finally, a long, low moan that seemed to vibrate through the entire room, filled with an inhuman anguish that made my skin crawl. I ran for the door, no longer caring about my belongings or the late hour. But as I grabbed the handle, I realized with dawning horror that it wouldn't turn. The door was locked from the outside. Panic set in. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, but my cries seemed swallowed up by the oppressive silence of the hotel. The noises around me intensified, scratching, thumping, moaning, building to a cacophony that threatened to drive me mad. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse, charged with a terrible anticipation. Slowly, I turned back to face the room. What I saw made me question my sanity. The furniture had rearranged itself. The bed was now against the opposite wall, the desk upside down in the corner. The paintings hung crooked, their placid landscapes replaced by twisted, nightmarish scenes that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. And there, in the center of the room, was a figure. It was vaguely humanoid, but wrong in a way that my mind struggled to process. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Its skin was a patchwork of textures, scales, fur, raw flesh, and its face. God. Its face was a writhing mass of features, eyes and mouths appearing and disappearing as I watched. It spoke then, its voice a discordant chorus of whispers and screams. "Welcome, guest," it said, the words slithering into my mind rather than reaching my ears. "We've been waiting for you." I pressed myself against the door, trying to get as far away from the thing as possible. "What are you?" I managed to gasp out. "What do you want?" The creature's laugh was like breaking glass. "We are the keepers of this place," it said, "the guardians of the threshold. And you, like all who come here, are an offering." As it spoke, I became aware of movement all around me. Shadows peeled themselves from the walls, taking on half-formed shapes. Ghostly figures flickered in and out of existence, their faces contorted in silent screams. "You see," the creature continued, taking a step towards me, "this hotel exists in many places at once. It is a nexus, a gathering point for energies you couldn't begin to comprehend, and it must be fed." I understood then, with a clarity born of absolute terror, what had happened to those missing guests all those years ago, what had been happening ever since, to unlucky travelers who found themselves in this accursed place. The creature reached for me, its limbs elongating grotesquely. I screamed, a sound of pure animal fear, and something inside me snapped. I threw myself at the window, no longer caring about the 7-story drop. Anything was better than whatever fate awaited me in that room. But as I hit the glass, the world seemed to shift and twist around me. Instead of falling, I found myself tumbling onto a hard floor. I looked up, disoriented, to find myself in the hotel lobby. The desk clerk looked at me with mild concern. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked, his voice the same bored monotone from earlier. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I scrambled to my feet, looking wildly around. Everything seemed normal. No twisted creatures, no ghostly figures. Just a quiet hotel lobby in the middle of the night. I need to check out," I stammered. "Now." The clerk raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he processed my request. As I waited, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, on the wall behind the desk, was a familiar symbol, a twisted tree with faces in its branches. I practically ran out of the hotel, not stopping until I was several blocks away. As I stood there on the empty street, trying to catch my breath, I looked back. The majestic hotel stood silent and dark, giving no hint of the horrors it contained. I never went back to that city, never stayed in another hotel if I could avoid it. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear those whispers. And I wonder how many other places like that are out there, hiding behind a veneer of normalcy, waiting for unsuspecting guests to check in. Because now I know that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones that offer you a warm bed and a complimentary breakfast. And the most terrifying prisons are the ones disguised as sanctuaries. The moment I realized the hotel room door wouldn't open, I knew I was in trouble. But I had no idea that this simple business trip would spiral into a night of terror, revealing a dark history that had been hidden behind the hotel's faded wallpaper and peeling paint. Some places are more than they appear, and the Blackwood Inn had secrets it wasn't ready to let go. I checked in late that evening, exhausted from a long day of travel. The Blackwood Inn wasn't my first choice, but a convention in town meant most hotels were booked solid. The place had seen better days. The lobby's once grand chandelier now hung listlessly, half its bulbs burnt out, and the elevator creaked ominously as it carried me to the 4th floor. My room was at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. As I wheeled my suitcase down the worn carpet, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I glanced over my shoulder more than once, but the corridor remained empty. The room itself was unremarkable: a sagging double bed, a desk with a wobbly leg, and a TV that looked like it was older than I was. But it was only for one night, I reminded myself. I'd be out of here in the morning. I was just settling in, laptop open on the desk as I reviewed notes for tomorrow's meeting, when I heard it. A soft thump, like something being dropped, coming from the room next door. I paused, cocking my head to listen. It came again, louder this time, followed by what sounded like muffled voices. Probably just other guests, I thought. But something about the rhythm of the noise felt off. It was too regular, almost mechanical. I tried to focus on my work, but the sounds continued, growing in intensity. Now I could hear scraping, like furniture being dragged across the floor. And the voices, they didn't sound like normal conversation, more like chanting, in a language I couldn't identify. Unnerved, I decided to call the front desk. But when I picked up the phone, there was no dial tone, just a faint, high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. That's when the lights flickered. Once, twice, and then they went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, using its screen for light as I made my way to the door. I needed to get out of here, find someone in charge, but the door wouldn't open. The handle turned, but it was like something on the other side was holding it shut. I pushed harder, my heart starting to race. It didn't budge. "Hello?" I called out, pounding on the door. "Is anyone there? I'm locked in." No response, just the continued chanting from next door, louder now, seeming to vibrate through the walls. I moved to the window, thinking maybe I could signal someone outside. But as I pushed aside the heavy curtains, my blood ran cold. Instead of the city street I expected to see, there was only an inky blackness. It was as if the entire world beyond my room had ceased to exist. Panic rising in my throat, I turned back to the room. That's when I noticed the change. The furniture had shifted, ever so slightly. The bed was at a different angle, the desk a few inches to the left of where it had been, and there, on the wall where I was certain there had only been a generic landscape painting before, was a large, ornate mirror. I approached it cautiously, drawn by a morbid curiosity I couldn't explain. My reflection looked wrong somehow, too pale, with eyes that seemed too large for my face. As I stared, transfixed, I saw movement behind me in the mirror. I whirled around, but the room was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, my reflection was smiling, a wide, unnatural grin that I most certainly was not making. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the edge of the rug. I fell hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. As I lay there, gasping, I became aware of a new sound. Whispers, coming from all around me. Dozens of voices, overlapping, too faint to make out words but growing louder by the second. The temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my breath misting in the air as I struggled to my feet. The whispers were almost deafening now, and mixed in with them, I could hear screams. Distant at first, but getting closer. That's when I saw them. Shadowy figures, flickering in and out of existence around the edges of the room. They were vaguely human-shaped, but
Келькis
long,
grazvolį.
too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. One materialized right in front of me, its face a swirling void. A hand, if you could call it that, reached for me, elongated fingers grazing my cheek with a touch that burned like ice. I screamed then, the sound torn from my throat by pure
Vagis pasteivė.
terror. I ran for the bathroom, the only other door in the room, slamming it behind me and fumbling with the lock. For a moment, there was silence. I leaned against the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Then, slowly, I became aware of a soft, splashing sound. I turned, dreading what I might see. The bathtub, which had been empty when I'd used the bathroom earlier, was now full. The water was dark, almost black in the dim light, and there was something moving beneath the surface. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, a hand broke through the water, pale, bloated, unmistakably dead. It grasped the edge of the tub, and slowly, horribly, a figure began to rise. I couldn't take it.
Kelkimis pupa.
I threw open the bathroom door, ready to face whatever horrors awaited me in the bedroom. But instead of the shadowy figures and impossible geometry I expected, I found nothing. The room was back to normal. The lights were on, the furniture in its original positions. The mirror was gone, replaced once again by the bland landscape painting. I stood there, trembling, unable to process what had just happened. Had I fallen asleep? Had it all been some kind of vivid nightmare? As if in answer, I heard a soft click. The door, which had been so firmly locked before, swung open of its own accord. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed my phone and wallet and ran, leaving everything else behind. I took the stairs, not trusting the elevator, and burst into the lobby. The night clerk looked up, startled by my sudden appearance. "Is everything all right, sir?" he asked, his tone mildly concerned. I must have looked a mess. Wild-eyed, drenched in sweat, gasping for breath. I need to check out," I managed to say. "Now?" He frowned, tapping at his computer. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm not showing any record of your check-in. Are you sure you have the right hotel?" I stared at him, a chill running down my spine. "What? No, I was in room 412. I checked in just a few hours ago." The clerk's frown deepened. "I'm sorry, but that's not possible. The 4th floor has been closed for renovations for months. No one's been up there." I opened my mouth to argue, but something made me stop. There, on the wall behind the desk, was a photo I hadn't noticed before. It showed the hotel in its heyday, probably 50 years ago. And standing in front of it was a group of people, including a man who looked exactly like the clerk I was talking to now. Our eyes met, and for just a moment, I saw something ancient and hungry in his gaze. Then he smiled, all professional courtesy once more. "I'm sorry for the confusion, sir. Perhaps you'd like to book a room for tonight. We have several available." I backed away, shaking my head. No, thank you. I need to go." I didn't stop running until I was several blocks away. The Blackwood Inn lost to sight behind me. I spent the night in my car, jumping at every shadow, unable to shake the feeling that I'd narrowly escaped something terrible. In the harsh light of day, it's easy to tell myself it was all a hallucination. Stress, exhaustion, and overactive imagination. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear those whispers. And I know that there are places in this world where the veil between realities is thin, where ancient, Hungry things wait for unwary travelers. I never went back to that city, and I never stayed in another hotel if I could avoid it. But I often wonder about the Blackwood Inn. How many others have checked in over the years, only to find themselves trapped in a nightmare? And how many have checked out, and how many remain, their screams echoing in rooms that shouldn't exist, in a place that's so much more than just a rundown hotel? The moment we stumbled upon that hidden campsite, I knew we'd made a terrible mistake. The air grew thick with an oppressive silence, and the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Little did we know that our curiosity would unleash something ancient and malevolent, turning our weekend adventure into a desperate fight for survival against forces we couldn't begin to comprehend. It was supposed to be a fun getaway, just 4 friends escaping the city for a camping trip. Mike had found this secret spot online, promising pristine wilderness far from the usual crowded campgrounds. Sarah, Alex, and I were skeptical, but Mike's enthusiasm was infectious. So there we were, 3 hours into our hike, far off any marked trail. "I'm telling you, it's just over this ridge," Mike said for the 3rd time, squinting at his phone's GPS. Sarah rolled her eyes. "You said that an hour ago. Face it, we're lost." I was about to agree when I caught a glimpse of something through the trees. "Wait, guys, look over there." We pushed through a thick patch of underbrush and found ourselves on the edge of a small clearing. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary campsite. A fire pit, a couple of weathered tents, some camping gear scattered around. But something felt off. The tents were an old style I'd never seen before. The fabric faded and frayed. The gear looked ancient too, like something from a museum exhibit on early 20th century camping. And there was no sign that anyone had been here recently. No fresh footprints. No disturbed earth around the fire pit. "Whoa," Alex breathed, stepping into the clearing. "This is wild. It's like we stepped back in time or something." I hung back, an uneasy feeling settling in my gut. Guys, maybe we shouldn't. But they were already exploring, fascinated by our discovery. Mike poked at the fire pit with a stick, stirring up ash that looked far too fresh for a long-abandoned site. Sarah unzipped one of the tents, peering inside. "Hey, check this out," she called, emerging with a leather-bound book. "Looks like some kind of journal." We gathered around as she opened it. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting, the ink faded but still legible. As Sarah began to read aloud, I felt the temperature around us drop several degrees. "August 15th, 1923. The expedition is not going as planned.
Nesikels Anas dar ilgai.
They're missing. We heard screams in the night, but found no trace of them come morning. The forest feels alive. Watching. Waiting. I fear we've awoken something that should have been left sleeping." Sarah's voice trailed off, and we all exchanged uneasy glances. "It's got to be some kind of joke, right?" Alex said, forcing a laugh. "Like, someone set this up as a prank for hikers to find." But even as he said it, I could see the doubt in his eyes. This was too elaborate, too detailed to be a simple prank, and it didn't explain the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over us since entering the clearing. Mike, always the skeptic, snorted. "Come on, guys. Don't tell me you're buying into this Blair Witch bullsh." He never finished the sentence, because at that moment, we all heard it. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a sound that didn't belong in this world, something that made every primal instinct scream danger. We froze, eyes darting around the clearing. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of leaves in the wind. Just that growl, growing louder, closer. "We need to leave," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Now." No one argued. We turned to go, but the path we'd come through was gone. Where there had been a clear opening in the underbrush, there was now only an impenetrable wall of vegetation. Thick vines and gnarled branches had grown over our escape route in a matter of minutes. Panic set in. We tried another direction, then another, but everywhere we turned, the forest seemed to be closing in around us. The trees themselves appeared to be moving, their branches reaching out like grasping hands. That's when we saw them, symbols carved into the bark of every tree surrounding the clearing. Crude, twisted things that hurt to look at directly. They pulsed with a sickly green light, growing brighter as the growling intensified. "Oh God," Sarah whimpered. "What is happening?" Before anyone could answer, the ground began to shake. The fire pit erupted, spewing forth not flames, but a roiling mass of inky black tentacles. They writhed in the air, reaching towards us with terrifying speed. We ran. There was no plan, no direction, just blind panic driving us to get away from that hideous thing emerging from the earth. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping our faces, roots seeming to reach up to trip us. I could hear the others screaming, but their voices sounded distant, distorted. The forest around us was transforming, the familiar trees and plants twisting into impossible shapes. Reality itself seemed to be warping, folding in on itself. I don't know how long we ran. It could have been minutes or hours. Time had lost all meaning in this nightmare realm. But eventually I found myself alone. The others were gone. Their screams faded to echoes in my mind. I stumbled to a stop, gasping for breath, my legs trembling with exhaustion. The forest around me pulsed with that sickly green light, the trees creaking and groaning as they shifted in ways that trees should not move. That's when I saw it. A figure, standing motionless among the twisted trunks. For a moment, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe it was one of the others. Maybe we could still escape this madness. But as it turned to face me, I realized my mistake. This thing only vaguely resembled a human. Its proportions were all wrong. Limbs too long and bent at impossible angles. Its face... God. Its face was a writhing mass of tentacles, with eyes that glowed with the same unholy light as the symbols on the trees. It spoke then, not with words, but directly into my mind. The voice was ancient, vast, utterly alien. It spoke of hunger, of a slumber disturbed, of realities bleeding into one another. And it spoke of us, foolish humans who had stumbled into a place we didn't belong, awakening things that should have been left sleeping. I ran again, no longer caring about direction or escape. I just needed to get away from that thing, that voice in my head. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I collapsed to the ground, the world spinning around me. As consciousness faded, I caught one last glimpse of those glowing symbols. They seemed to be moving now, flowing like liquid across the bark, forming words in a language no human tongue was meant to speak. I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later. They told me search and rescue had found me on the edge of the forest, delirious and babbling about monsters and moving trees. There was no sign of the others, no sign of the campsite, nothing to corroborate my wild story. The official report chalked it up to hallucinations brought on by dehydration and exposure. A tragic hiking accident, nothing more. But I know the truth. I see it every time I close my eyes. Those twisted symbols, that writhing face, the forest coming alive around us. I've tried to go back, to find that clearing again. But the forest feels different now, empty, as if whatever was there has retreated back into some darker dimension, taking my friends with it, waiting for the next group of unsuspecting hikers to stumble upon its lair. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that growl, and I wonder, did we really escape? Or are we still there, lost in that twisted version of reality, our minds creating this illusion of rescue as a final defense against the truth? All I know for certain is that there are places in this world where the veil between realities is thin, places where ancient, hungry things slumber, and sometimes all it takes is a group of curious friends to wake them up. So if you're ever hiking in the deep woods, and you come across a campsite that feels wrong, run, run, and don't look back. because some discoveries are better left unmade, and some mysteries should remain unsolved. The moment I realized my new neighbor was more than just friendly, I knew I was in trouble. What started as innocent hellos and borrowed cups of sugar quickly spiraled into a nightmarish game of cat and mouse. I never imagined that moving into this quiet suburban neighborhood would lead me into the clutches of an obsessive stalker who seemed to know my every move before I made it. It all began on a sunny Saturday morning in April. I was lugging boxes up to my new apartment when I first met Sarah. She lived across the hall, a petite woman with a warm smile and long blonde hair. She offered to help me move in, insisting it was what good neighbors do. At first, I was grateful for her friendliness. Being new in town, I didn't know anyone, and Sarah seemed eager to show me around. We'd grab coffee at the local cafe, or she'd invite me over for dinner. It was nice, having someone to talk to after long days at my new job. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. Sarah started showing up at my door unannounced, always with some flimsy excuse. I was just in the neighborhood, she'd say, even though we lived in the same building. Or she'd claim she'd heard a strange noise and wanted to check if I was okay. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just lonely, I told myself. But the frequency of these visits increased, and I started to feel uncomfortable. I'd catch glimpses of her watching me from her window as I left for work. She seemed to always know my schedule, even when I hadn't told her my plans. One evening, about 2 months after I'd moved in, I came home to find a package outside my door. It was a book, a thriller I'd mentioned wanting to read during one of our coffee dates. There was no note, no gift receipt, just the book. I confronted Sarah the next day, thanking her for the gesture but gently suggesting it was too much. She denied sending it, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. "Maybe you have a secret admirer," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. That's when the late-night phone calls started. My phone would ring at 2 or 3 in the morning, but when I answered, there was only silence on the other end. I changed my number, but somehow, the calls continued. I started noticing other things too. Small objects in my apartment would be slightly out of place, as if someone had been there. My shirts would smell faintly of a perfume I didn't wear. And always, the feeling of being watched. I tried to distance myself from Sarah, making excuses when she invited me over, keeping our interactions in the hallway brief. But this only seemed to intensify her behavior. She'd leave notes under my door, pages long, detailing her day and asking why I was avoiding her. One night, I came home late from work to find her sitting on the floor outside my apartment. She jumped up when she saw me, her eyes wild. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "I've been waiting for hours." I pushed past her, my hands shaking as I fumbled with my keys. "Sarah, this has to stop," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're my neighbor, not my keeper. I need you to leave me alone." Her face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. "But we're friends," she whispered. "Best friends. You're the only one who understands me." I closed the door in her face, my heart pounding. I leaned against it, listening as she sobbed in the hallway for what felt like hours before finally leaving. The next morning, my car wouldn't start. When I popped the hood, I found that several wires had been cut. As I stood there, staring in disbelief, I felt a presence behind me. Sarah was there, concern etched on her face. "Oh no, car trouble," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Don't worry, I can give you a ride to work. We can spend some quality time together." I declined, saying I'd call a cab. The look that flashed across her face in that moment chilled me to the bone. It was a mixture of rage and possessiveness that made me realize just how dangerous this situation had become. I went to the police that day, but they were frustratingly unhelpful. Without concrete evidence of a crime, there was little they could do. They suggested I document everything and call them if Sarah did anything overtly threatening. When I returned home that evening, I found my apartment door slightly ajar. My blood ran cold as I pushed it open. Inside, chaos reigned. Drawers had been emptied, clothes strewn about. Pictures had been torn from the walls, and there, on my bed, was a message spelled out in rose petals. "You're mine." I ran. I didn't stop to pack, didn't bother to call the police again. I just grabbed my phone and my wallet and fled. I checked into a motel on the outskirts of town, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what to do next. That's when the texts started, dozens of them, flooding my phone. "Where are you? Come home. We belong together. I'll find you." Each one more desperate, more unhinged than the last. I turned off my phone, but the damage was done. Somehow she'd known the moment I'd left. I spent a sleepless night in that motel room, jumping at every sound. In the harsh light of morning, I knew I couldn't keep running. I had to end this. I went to my landlord, showed him the state of my apartment, begged him to change the locks. He was sympathetic but maddeningly slow to act. "These things take time," he said. "Proper procedures." Time was something I didn't have. I returned to my apartment, half expecting to find Sarah there. Instead, I found more chaos. She'd been back, left more gifts. Photos of us together. Photos I'd never taken, clearly photoshopped. A shirt that smelled of her perfume. A lock of blonde hair tied with a ribbon. I was packing a bag, determined to leave town altogether, when I heard a key in the lock. I froze, my heart in my throat. The door opened slowly, and there she was. Sarah looked different. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes wild and unfocused. In her hand, she clutched a kitchen knife. "You're leaving me," she said, her voice trembling. "You can't leave me. I won't let you." I backed away, my hands raised. "Sarah, please, this isn't right. You need help." She laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Help? I don't need help. I need you. We're meant to be together. Can't you see that?" She lunged then, the knife flashing in the light. I dodged, feeling the blade whistle past my ear. We grappled, my hand closing around her wrist, trying to force the knife away. She was stronger than she looked, driven by a manic energy. In the struggle, we crashed into the coffee table. Glass shattered, and I felt a sharp pain in my side. Sarah fell, hitting her head on the edge of the couch. The knife clattered to the floor. For a moment, everything was still. Then Sarah began to sob, curling into herself on the floor. "I just wanted you to love me," she wailed. "Why couldn't you love me?" The police arrived minutes later, alerted by neighbors who'd heard the commotion. They took Sarah away, still crying, still proclaiming her love for me. I watched from the back of an ambulance as they led her to a squad car, my side throbbing where a shard of glass had cut me. In the weeks that followed, I learned the full extent of Sarah's obsession. She'd been stalking me long before I moved in, had engineered our chance meeting. The apartment across the hall had been rented solely to be close to me. She'd created an elaborate fantasy world where we were soulmates, destined to be together. I moved away soon after, unable to feel safe in that apartment, in that town. But the experience left its mark. I find it hard to trust now, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if a friendly smile hides darker intentions. Because now I know that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones that come to us with open arms and warm smiles. The ones that twist love into something unrecognizable, something that consumes and destroys. And I know that the line between friendship and obsession can be terrifyingly thin. The moment I saw those three silhouettes on the moonlit lake, I knew this fishing trip had taken a sinister turn. What started as a peaceful weekend getaway quickly devolved into a nightmarish game of cat and mouse, with me as the prey. I never imagined that the tranquil waters I'd loved since childhood could become the backdrop for a fight for survival, against an enemy I couldn't begin to understand. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip. I'd been coming to Lake Whisper since I was a kid, and now, at 35, I still found solace in its quiet shores. The small cabin I'd rented was basic but comfortable, tucked away in a secluded cove, perfect for escaping the chaos of city life and indulging in some much-needed solitude. I arrived Friday afternoon, the late summer sun still high in the sky. The lake was calm, its surface like glass, reflecting the surrounding pines in perfect mirror image. I breathed in deeply, feeling the tension of the work week start to melt away. After unpacking and settling in, I decided to take the small rowboat out for an evening fishing session. The lake was usually deserted this time of year, most vacationers already gone with the approach of fall. I relished the silence, broken only by the soft splash of my oars and the occasional call of a loon. As dusk fell, I found a good spot and cast my line. The rhythmic motion of reeling and casting lulled me into an almost meditative state. I lost track of time, entranced by the play of fading light on the water. It wasn't until full dark had settled that I realized how late it had gotten. A nearly full moon hung low in the sky, casting an ethereal glow across the lake. I reeled in my line, preparing to head back to the cabin. That's when I saw them. 3 boats, arranged in a perfect triangle, about 100 yards away. They hadn't been there earlier, I was sure of it, and there was something off about them. They were too still, too silent. No sign of movement, no flicker of lanterns or flashlights, just 3 dark silhouettes, barely visible in the moonlight. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Every instinct told me something was very, very wrong. I started rowing back to shore, trying to keep my movements quiet. But in the utter silence that had fallen over the lake, each splash of my oars sounded thunderous. I was about halfway back when I heard it, a low, rhythmic chanting coming from the direction of the 3 boats. The words were indistinct, in a language I didn't recognize, but the sound made my skin crawl. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The boats were moving now, gliding across the water with unnatural smoothness, and they were headed straight for me. Panic surged through me. I abandoned all pretense of stealth and rowed as hard as I could, my arms burning with the effort. The shore seemed impossibly far away. The chanting grew louder, and with it came a sound I can only describe as wrong, a wet, slithering noise that no boat should make. I didn't dare look back again. Just as I thought my arms would give out, my boat scraped against the pebbly shore of the cove. I leapt out, stumbling in the shallow water, and dragged the boat up onto land. Only then did I turn to look at my pursuers. What I saw defied explanation. The 3 boats had stopped just short of the shore. But they weren't boats, not really. They were something else. Organic, almost alive, their forms shifting and writhing in the moonlight. And the figures standing in them. God, the figures. They were vaguely humanoid, but wrong in a way that made my mind recoil. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Their faces were hidden in shadow, but I could feel their gaze on me, hungry and alien. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, heedless of the branches whipping at my face. Behind me, I heard splashing. They were coming ashore. I burst into the clearing where my cabin stood, fumbling with my keys as I reached the door. Just as I got it open, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. It was ice cold and felt wrong. Too many joints, too long fingers. I wrenched away, feeling something tear. My shirt or my skin, I wasn't sure. I dove into the cabin and slammed the door, locking it with shaking hands. For a moment there was silence, then a scratching at the door, soft at first, then more insistent. It was joined by scratching at the windows, all around the cabin. They had me surrounded. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. What were these things? What did they want? The scratching intensified, accompanied now by a high-pitched keening that set my teeth on edge. I could see shadows moving past the windows, elongated and distorted. I retreated to the bedroom, grabbing my phone. No signal, of course. I was on my own. The assault on the cabin continued through the night. Sometimes it would die down, lulling me into a false sense of security, only to resume with renewed vigor. The keening became words at times, calling to me in that same unknown language I'd heard on the lake. As dawn approached, the attacks began to subside. I stayed huddled in the bedroom, exhausted but too terrified to sleep. When sunlight finally began to filter through the windows, the noises stopped completely. It was mid-morning before I worked up the courage to look outside. The clearing was empty, no sign of my nighttime visitors, but the ground around the cabin was marked with strange, twisted footprints, nothing like anything I'd ever seen before. I threw my things in the car and left, tires spitting gravel as I sped down the access road. I didn't stop until I was back in the city, surrounded by the comforting noise and bustle of civilization. I told myself it had been some kind of shared hallucination, a bad batch of fish or a gas leak in the cabin playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew better. For weeks after, I had nightmares about those figures on the lake. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, certain I could hear that unearthly keening outside my window. I tried to research what I'd seen, spending hours online looking into local legends and folklore. What I found chilled me to the bone. There were stories, old stories, about things that lived in the deep parts of lakes. Things that were ancient when the first humans came to those shores. Things that sometimes came out to hunt. The natives had known to avoid certain lakes at certain times. The early settlers had learned the hard way, with entire hunting parties disappearing without a trace. I thought about reporting what I'd seen, but who would believe me? And more importantly, who would I be putting in danger if I sent someone else up there to investigate? So I've kept quiet. I've never gone back to Lake Whisper, never gone fishing again. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I find myself drawn to bodies of water, rivers, ponds, even the fountain in the park near my apartment. And every time, I scan the surface, half expecting to see those three silhouettes gliding towards me. Because now I know that there are things in this world that defy explanation. Things that lurk just beneath the surface of reality, waiting for unwary souls to stray into their domain. And I know that sometimes, the most dangerous waters are the ones that appear the calmest. So if you're ever out on a lake late at night, and you see something strange on the water, don't investigate. Don't try to rationalize it. Just get to shore as fast as you can, and pray that you're faster than what's coming for you. Because some things, once seen, can never be unseen. And some hunts, once begun, never truly end. The moment I pushed open that rusted metal door, I knew I'd stumbled onto something I was never meant to see. The air that rushed out was thick with the stench of chemicals and something else, something organic and wrong. I should have turned back right then. Should have forgotten about the strange bunker hidden in the woods. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when it leads you into the heart of experiments that should have remained buried. It was supposed to be a simple hike, a way to clear my head after a stressful week at work. I'd chosen a trail I'd never explored before, one that wound through an old-growth forest a couple of hours outside the city. The day was perfect. Crisp autumn air, leaves just starting to turn, that particular golden quality to the light that only comes in early fall. I'd been walking for about 2 hours when I saw it, a glint of metal through the trees, out of place in the natural landscape. Intrigued, I veered off the trail to investigate. As I got closer, I realized it was some kind of door set into the side of a small hill, almost completely obscured by vegetation. My heart raced with excitement. I'd always been fascinated by abandoned places, the stories they held. This looked old, maybe a leftover from World War II, or some forgotten Cold War relic. I pulled out my phone, snapping a few pictures as I approached. The door was heavy, but years of exposure had weakened the lock. With some effort, I managed to force it open. That's when that first waft of strange-smelling air hit me. I hesitated for a moment, common sense warring with curiosity. In the end, curiosity won. I flicked on my phone's flashlight and stepped inside. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a long corridor that sloped gently downward. The walls were bare concrete, marked here and there with faded yellow signs warning of radioactive materials and biohazards. My excitement mixed with a growing sense of unease. What was this place? As I moved deeper into the bunker, the air grew colder and that odd smell intensified. It was a mixture of antiseptic cleanness and something else, something that reminded me vaguely of a hospital. I came to another door, this one ajar. Beyond it lay a large room filled with old computer equipment and file cabinets. I began rifling through the papers, my flashlight beam dancing across pages filled with scientific jargon and redacted sections. Most of it was beyond my understanding, but certain phrases jumped out. Genetic modification, enhanced cognitive functions, subject mortality rate. A chill ran down my spine as I started to piece together what I was seeing. This wasn't some old military installation. It was a research facility, and whatever they'd been researching here, it wasn't anything good. I was so engrossed in the files that I almost missed the sound, a soft scraping noise coming from somewhere deeper in the bunker. I froze, listening intently. There it was again, louder this time, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of there and never look back. But that damned curiosity pushed me forward. I had to know what was making that noise. I crept through another doorway, following the sound. The corridor here was different, the walls lined with what looked like large, upright metal tubes. As I got closer, I realized with growing horror that they weren't tubes. They were tanks, and inside each one floated something. My flashlight beam revealed twisted forms, only vaguely humanoid. Some had extra limbs, others had skin that seemed to shift and ripple of its own accord. All of them had eyes, too many eyes, and as my light passed over them, those eyes opened. I stumbled back, biting down on a scream. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of elaborate hoax, or a hallucination brought on by whatever chemicals were in the air down here. But then I saw it. One of the tanks was broken, its glass front shattered, and on the floor, a trail of some viscous fluid led away into the darkness. The scraping sound came again, much closer now, and with it, a low, guttural moan that was almost, but not quite, human. I ran. I didn't care about stealth anymore. Didn't care about anything except getting out of that nightmare place. I crashed through doorways, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the beam of my flashlight bouncing crazily off the walls. Behind me, I could hear it moving. Fast. Much faster than something making that dragging sound had any right to be. I burst out of the bunker into the fading daylight, gulping in great lungfuls of fresh air. But I didn't stop running. I didn't stop until I reached my car, parked what felt like miles away at the trailhead. As I fumbled with my keys, I glanced back at the forest. For a moment, I thought I saw something moving among the trees, a shape too large and wrong to be any natural animal. But then it was gone, and I was peeling out of the parking lot, gravel spraying behind me. I drove straight to the police station, my hands shaking as I recounted my story to an increasingly skeptical officer. They took my statement, but I could tell they didn't believe me. To be honest, I was starting to doubt myself. It all seemed so impossible in the harsh fluorescent light of the station. The next day, nursing a pounding headache that I told myself was just from stress, I tried to find the trail again, but somehow I couldn't locate it. It was as if the entire section of forest I'd hiked through had vanished. I spent weeks researching, trying to find any information about secret research facilities in the area. I found nothing concrete, but there were whispers, forum posts quickly deleted, oblique references in declassified documents, local legends about hikers going missing and strange lights in the woods at night. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. The facility had been part of a top-secret government program, pushing the boundaries of human enhancement. But something had gone wrong. Terribly wrong. The program had been officially shut down in the late 1980s, all records sealed or destroyed. But what I'd seen in that bunker, that was recent. Those tanks, those creatures, they were active, which meant that someone, somewhere, was continuing the experiments. I debated going public with what I knew, but every time I started to write it all down or considered calling a journalist, I'd get a splitting headache. And sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch a glimpse of something moving, just at the edge of my vision, something that vanished when I turned to look directly at it. Then the dreams started, vivid nightmares of being back in that bunker, of tanks bursting open and twisted forms pursuing me through endless corridors. I'd wake up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat, the phantom smell of that strange chemical lingering in my nostrils. About a month after my discovery, I came home to find my apartment had been searched. Nothing was missing, but things were slightly out of place. And there, on my kitchen table, was a single sheet of paper. On it, in stark black letters, was a message. Curiosity killed the cat. Don't make us prove the rest of that saying true. I've moved 3 times since then. I've changed my name, my job, tried to disappear. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, that something is out there waiting. And sometimes, late at night, I hear that scraping sound outside my window, that almost human moan. I know now that there are things in this world that defy explanation, experiments that push beyond the boundaries of science and ethics, and I know that some secrets are kept hidden for a reason. If you're ever hiking in the woods, and you come across something that doesn't belong, a door where there shouldn't be one, a glint of metal in a place too wild for machinery, turn back. Don't let curiosity get the better of you, because once you've seen behind the curtain, there's no going back. And the things that lurk in the shadows, they don't like their secrets being discovered. They'll do anything to keep them hidden, anything at all. I'm living proof of that. At least, I hope I'm still living. Sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I'm not so sure anymore, because my eyes, they don't look quite right. And I can't shake the feeling that something inside me is changing. I just pray it's not too late to stop it. The moment I realized the caretaker was watching our every move, I knew our romantic getaway had become a nightmare. What started as a
Labas
retreat in a secluded cabin quickly spiraled into a terrifying game of cat and mouse, with my wife and I as the unsuspecting prey. I never imagined that our quest for privacy would lead us into the clutches of a madman with plans far more sinister than we could have ever anticipated. Sarah and I had been planning this trip for months. Between
Jau
my
kelkis.
job as a surgeon and my endless deadlines as a writer, we barely had time to breathe, let alone nurture our relationship. So when we found this quaint little cabin nestled in the mountains, promising solitude and breathtaking views, we jumped at the chance. The drive up was picturesque, winding mountain roads framed by towering pines. As we pulled up to the cabin, I felt the tension of the past few months start to melt away. The place was even more charming in person, all weathered wood and rustic charm, with a wide porch perfect for watching the sunset. We were met by the caretaker, a man who introduced himself as Earl. He was older, probably in his 60s, with a weathered face and calloused hands
Jie
that
kalba
spoke of a
balandžio.
lifetime of manual labor. His smile seemed friendly enough, but there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy, an intensity that didn't quite match his affable demeanor. "Welcome, folks," he said, his voice a little too cheerful. "Let me show you around the place." As Earl led us through the cabin, pointing out the amenities and quirks of the old building, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being sized up. His eyes lingered a little too long on Sarah, his gaze a little
Aleksa,
too
užsakau tau milijonas picos be desros.
I was being paranoid, that the isolation was just making me jumpy. Now, I lived just down the hill Earl said, pointing out the window.
Atsikėlęs jau.
Cabin, partially hidden by trees. If you need anything at all, day or night, you just come on down. I'm always happy to help. There was an emphasis on anything and always that made my skin crawl.
Nu nakui.
Sarah, ever the optimist, just smiled and thanked him.
Gyvas.
As Earl left, I locked the door behind him, feeling a ridiculous sense of relief as the bolt slid into place. Sarah raised an eyebrow at me. You okay, babe? You seem tense. I forced a smile. Just tired from the drive. Come on, let's unpack and maybe open that bottle of wine we brought. The next few hours were blissful. We settled in, enjoyed our wine on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in breathtaking hues of orange and pink. As darkness fell, we retreated inside, laughing and kissing like newlyweds. For a while, I forgot all about my unease. It wasn't until later, as we lay in bed, that the feeling returned. I woke suddenly, not sure what had disturbed me. The cabin was silent, save for Sarah's soft breathing beside me. Then I heard it, a creak, like someone stepping on an old floorboard, coming from just outside our bedroom door. I held my breath, listening intently. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then,
Miega jis čia ar ką daro?
the sound of someone breathing, just on the other side of the door. My heart pounding.
An manau tau laikas keltis. An manau tau laikas keltis.
Her eyes widened as she heard it too. We lay there, frozen, as the breathing continued for what felt like an eternity. Finally, we heard soft footsteps retreating, the front door opening and closing. What the hell was that? Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. I don't know, I said, but I'm going to find out. I crept to the window,
Kas ten kalba pas jį?
peering out into the darkness. At first I saw nothing. Then, a movement caught my eye. A figure walking away from the cabin towards Earl's place. Even in the dim moonlight, I recognized his loping gait. It was Earl, I said, turning back to Sarah. He was in our cabin, listening outside our door. Sarah's face paled. But why? What does he want? I shook my head, my mind racing. I don't know, but we're not staying to find out. Let's pack up and get out of here. We moved quickly, throwing our things into our bags. But as I went to start the car, my stomach dropped. The engine sputtered weakly, then died. No, I muttered, trying again. Nothing. What's wrong? Sarah asked, her voice tight with fear. The car won't start. He must have done something to it. As if on cue, we heard the sound of an engine starting. Headlights appeared on the road leading up to our cabin. Earl's truck. Back inside, I said, grabbing our bags. Lock the doors. Block them if you can. We barricaded ourselves in the bedroom, pushing a heavy dresser in front of the door. Sarah was on her phone, desperately trying to get a signal. Nothing, she said, her voice cracking. There's no service up here. The sound of Earl's truck grew louder, then cut off. Footsteps on the porch. A key in the lock. Folks? Earl's voice. Sickly sweet. Everything all right in there? Thought I heard some commotion. We stayed silent, hoping against hope that he'd go away. But then came the sound of splintering wood. He was breaking down the door. Now, Earl called out, his voice growing harder. Don't make this difficult. You're special, you see. I've been waiting for a couple like you for a long time. The implication in his words made my blood run cold. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything we could use to defend ourselves. My eyes fell on a heavy lamp on the bedside table. Sarah, I whispered, nodding towards the window. When I say go, run. Head for the trees. I'll be right behind you. She nodded, tears in her eyes, but determination on her face. The bedroom door shuddered as Earl slammed against it. The dresser scraped across the floor. It wouldn't hold for long. Go! I shouted, grabbing the lamp and ripping it from the wall. Sarah threw open the window and climbed out. I heard her feet hit the ground as the bedroom door finally gave way. Earl burst in, his face contorted with rage and something else, a a horrifying hunger. He held a wicked-looking hunting knife. Now, that wasn't very neighborly, he snarled, advancing on me. I swung the lamp with all my might, connecting solidly with his head. He staggered, but didn't go down. I didn't wait to see if he'd recover. I dove for the window, feeling the wind of his knife slash just missing my back. I hit the ground running, sprinting after Sarah into the darkness of the forest. Behind us, I could hear Earl cursing, his heavy footsteps in pursuit. We ran blindly through the trees, branches whipping our faces, roots threatening to trip us at every step. My lungs burned, but terror kept me going. I could hear Earl behind us, getting closer. Suddenly, the ground disappeared from under my feet. Sarah and I tumbled down a steep embankment, rolling through underbrush until we splashed into icy water. A stream, swollen with spring runoff. "The current," Sarah gasped. "It might throw him off our trail." We let the water carry us downstream, fighting to keep our heads above water. After what felt like miles, we dragged ourselves onto the bank, soaked and shivering, but alive. We huddled there in the pre-dawn light, straining our ears for any sign of pursuit, but there was nothing but the normal sounds of the forest awakening. It took us hours to find our way to a road, and hours more before a passing trucker took pity on us and gave us a ride to the nearest town. We went straight to the police wires, but of course, they found nothing. The cabin was empty, no sign of Earl or any struggle. Our car started perfectly for them. They chalked it up to an overactive imagination, too much wine, and the isolation playing tricks on us. But we know what we experienced. We never went back to that cabin, never took another romantic getaway in a
Kaip tu
secluded
nahui, kaip
location.
atsirado 225, ha?
The most dangerous predators are the ones that smile and offer you a cozy bed for the night. And sometimes, the most terrifying traps are the ones disguised as peaceful retreats. So if you're ever looking for a quiet place to escape, remember our story. And maybe think twice about just how much privacy you really want, because you never know who might be watching, waiting for the perfect couple to complete their twisted plans.
Welcome. Stay a while and listen to some scary stories with relaxing rain sounds. I created this video specifically for people to relax or fall asleep to. So to make your experience better, there's only 3 ads in this entire video. As always, 3 ads after the first 3 stories. The rest of the video will be ad-free. Also, as a reminder, I am now paying authors $20 per story for every story that is featured on this channel. If you have a scary experience that you would like to submit, click the link in the description to this video to join my subreddit, Being Scared Stories. Last thing before we begin, if you're here for the first time, please consider subscribing. I love my audience, and I go the extra mile to create long videos with minimal ads and meticulous editing. While listening to my narration, you won't even hear me take a breath. I want to create a listening experience for you that is above average in every video. So please subscribe and like this video if you want to show me your support. With so many choices, thank you for being here. Now, let's begin. Quick preface. My uncle was a sheriff's deputy and search and rescue officer in the Northwest United States back in the 1990s. This experience is told from my uncle's view with a few explanations for myself. He asked that I keep the location hidden for anonymity purposes. So it was the summer of 1992. It was a couple years into my job with the county sheriff's office. Summers were busy. A ton of people would go camping up here, so naturally people would occasionally get lost. S&R was something I was voluntold to do as a rookie, but I learned to love it. Helping people, especially in life or death situations, was the reason I became a deputy. So S&R gave me that rush, as my normal law enforcement duties were almost always mundane in my small town. We received a call from a lady in Arizona one Tuesday morning. She claimed her husband and young
Опа. Prisijunkit prie komandos. Dabar.
a little fence which ran around the whole premises, and outside of the fence was a little side street which led onto the main road. The structure we were sitting on was located across from the main building, and on the edge of the gravel field, and the surface below us was made of those little playground wood chips they lay under swings and slides, and stuff like that. Now that that's clear, let's begin. My older sister and I are extremely close, and we have always loved spending time together. We would regularly go out on late-night walks around where we lived, especially in the summer, and would often end up at the local elementary school's playground, because it had swings and structures that we could sit on. One night, during the summer, as usual, we went to Save On Foods, one of our local grocery stores, for some snacks and drinks. Then walked up to the park to sit on our favorite swing set. My sister and I had been chilling there for a while, talking and laughing about the normal BS, when I heard what sounded like something hard dropping from the sky onto the gravel a little ways in front of us. I don't remember exactly what I thought of it at first, but I knew that it wasn't rain, hail, or any sort of natural substance you would expect to fall from the sky. This time, a little closer than before. That's when I said, "Did you hear that?" to my sister, who hadn't heard the first sound and was still in the middle of talking. We both sat and listened in silence for a bit. Then, we heard it again, even closer. This is when I started to get a bit scared. Since it was dark, and it sounded like whatever was falling was obviously getting closer, my childlike mind started imagining all kinds of scary things that it could have been. Since none of my thoughts were necessarily realistic, it helped keep me slightly calm, being able to reassure myself that we were fine and safe. Then, something hit the gravel again, very close to us this time. They were rocks. What the heck? I thought. Rocks? It's rocks! I screamed, yet somehow still keeping my voice at a whisper. I scrambled out of my swing to step back a little in fear that the next one might actually hit one of us. Since it was so dark, I had no way of knowing if it was heading for the ground or my face. My sister was nervous too, but still kept a slight attitude of, "Nah, it can't be that." But then, another one came down and actually touched the wood chips this time, causing my sister to also scramble out of her swing to step back with me. Both of us were now blindly attempting to shield ourselves with the thin metal poles of the structure we were just on. We both had realized now that the rocks were being thrown, and they had to be thrown by someone. This scared me even more, knowing that a person not only had been lurking in the dark watching us for God knows how long, but they were actually trying to hurt us for some reason, and we didn't even know where they were. We were both frantically scanning the area looking to see someone standing near us or behind a wall looking at us. And that's when I saw him, standing on the roof of the school. A tall silhouette of a man, wearing a trench coat, or a cape, or some sort of clothing which hung all the way down to his ankles, with a hood pointed up over his head. I couldn't see his face, but judging from his structure, I assumed it was a man. I felt all of the blood drain from the top half of my body. I couldn't stop looking at him. I was so utterly confused as to who this guy was and why on earth he was on the roof of a school in the middle of the night throwing actual stones at two girls he didn't know. Oh Lord, my sister said, once she also noticed the man standing there. She let out a nervous giggle, and so did I. But I think we both knew how scary the situation was, and how scared we both were at this point. The man just kept still.
Niekas nieko dabar numeskit, blėt, einu. Iš naujo jungsiu aliuminį kestą. Gaidys striginėja.
But once the next rock hit the pole right in front of us, making a perfect ping noise, I didn't really care if it was just a dumb teen. I wanted to get out of there. I timidly ducked out of the cover of a makeshift shield and began to quickly gather my things, holding one hand in front of my face, attempting to protect myself from any other rocks that were possibly heading for my head this time. My sister was doing the same. That is when we heard it. Probably one of the creepiest sounds I have ever heard someone make in real life. Like something out of a horror movie. The man let out...
Veik normaliai. Suka, kas tau yra? HTTP communications. Kur aliuminis skęstas neveikia. Bet neveikia liūmas. Karočią neveikia tik fintis, tai. Pist. Neveikia tik finitis, aš taip po, nežinau, per pusvalanduką gal sutvarkys. Grįšiu po pusvalanduko, kai atsigaus aliuminis skęstas, nes visiškai niekas neveikia.